In Christianity, saints are considered to be some of the holiest people to have walked the earth. They feature prominently in Christian art, though many of these depictions are disturbing, to say the least. These images offer us a haunting glimpse into the lives of Christian saints and the many legends that surround them. So, who are these saints? What kind of trials did they face? And what secrets do these artworks contain? Welcome to Strange Christian Art. This episode, The Saints. Throughout Christian history, the deeds of saints have often been seen as the ideal standard for Christian living. In many traditions, believers will ask saints to intercede for them, meaning that they pray to God on the believer's behalf. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of recognized saints, many of whom date back to the earliest Christian communities. Among the hallowed halls of Christian saints include many who gave their lives for the faith, a sacrifice known as martyrdom, which brings us to our first saint. The Skinless Apostle. Located in the Duomo of Milan is the statue of Saint Bartholomew. The saint wears a long robe draped around his muscular body. But there's one problem. This isn't fabric. Look closer and you'll notice that this robe is made from the saint's own skin, with his muscles underneath fully exposed. This statue commemorates one of the most gruesome martyrdoms in Christian history. According to legend, Saint Bartholomew was flayed alive. Saint Bartholomew was one of the original 12 disciples. He appears throughout the New Testament, faithfully following Jesus as he preached the gospel. In his later years, Bartholomew was one of the first Christian apostles and travelled widely to spread the teachings of Christianity. His journey eventually took him to ancient Armenia, where he converted some of the local population. However, he was captured by a local king, who, fearing Christianity's spread, ordered for his skin to be removed. Centuries later, the story of Saint Bartholomew is commemorated with statues like this. While gruesome to behold, it is undeniably a masterpiece. Sculpted in 1562, it displays intricately detailed anatomy, with muscles painstakingly chiseled into the marble. In fact, artworks like these reflect a growing interest in the science of the human body. Images depicting Saint Bartholomew's martyrdom would go on to influence early anatomical illustrations. The martyrdom of Saint Bartholomew appears frequently in Christian art, where he is often draped in a cloak of his own skin. Another famous depiction can be found on the painted walls of the Sistine Chapel. Standing among the saints is Bartholomew, holding his flayed skin. That said, he also appears to have a perfectly intact set of his own. So how did he? Saint Bartholomew is the patron saint of many things, from Armenia to leatherworkers. One lesser-known title is that he's also the patron saint of bookbinders, a nod to the medieval practice of using animal skins as a writing material. Though his fate may have been gruesome, Saint Bartholomew remains glorified throughout Christian art. After all these centuries, his statue still stands defiantly in the grand halls of the cathedral in Milan. Yet, the remains of our next saint go a little more than skin deep. The Catacomb Knight. In a church in Switzerland stands a skeleton dressed in the finest armour. Behind this angelic warrior is a spiked halo made of gold. These bones are believed to be the remains of Saint Pancratius. The fact that this saint is dressed as a knight is no coincidence. It was made in response to the Protestant Reformation, which saw the widespread destruction of saintly relics. As part of the Catholic response, churches sought to replace their lost relics, and so ancient remains were carefully exhumed from the Roman catacombs, just like the bones of Saint Pancratius, which were relocated to Switzerland. The result is a warrior of the revived Catholic Church. Relocating Christian remains was a widespread practice. Perhaps the most famous example is the Bone Church at Kutná Hora in Czechia, which is decorated using the remains of 40,000 people. In the centuries past, waves of plague and famine caused the local graveyard to overflow. So, to manage this demand, the remains were brought inside and used to decorate the church. From this skeletal chandelier to a coat of arms made entirely from bone. Even the artist's signature has been spelled out using human remains. The ossuary at Kutna is now a sacred site and attracts pilgrims and tourists from around the world. It's a vivid example of the memento mori, a reminder that everybody, no matter how rich or poor, will ultimately meet the same fate. This was a popular Christian motif, appearing frequently in medieval art. Another example of this is the statue of Saint Innocent, which once presided over a cemetery in Paris. While statues like these are certainly unnerving, there is a haunting beauty to them. While we may not know their true identity, each skeleton reminds us of the many nameless followers who are now lost to history. Sacred suffering. For many Christians, following the righteous path means being willing to put everything on the line. The next saints did just that, and are forever commemorated by the symbols of their martyrdom. In many artworks depicting St. Lawrence, you'll notice that he's carrying a gridiron, a metal grate used for cooking meat. But in this story, it was St. Lawrence who was on the menu. As a punishment for being Christian, he was condemned to be roasted over a fire. Despite the intense suffering, he managed to utter some of the greatest final words in history. "Turn me over, I'm done on this side." Today, he's the patron saint of chefs and comedians. A similar story is that of St. Catherine, who is often portrayed carrying a fearsome spiked wheel. For refusing to renounce her faith, she was sentenced to the so-called breaking wheel. Considered to be one of the most brutal forms of execution, it was designed to break someone's spirit by, well, breaking them. But in St. Catherine's story, when she approached the device, it miraculously shattered in two. Ever since, St. Catherine has been depicted with the very wheel that failed to break her. This method of execution was widely used during the Inquisitions, especially the one that no one expects. It was commonly referred to as St. Catherine's Wheel, a nod to the Christian saint, although maybe that's missing the point of the original story. The final symbol is perhaps the strangest of them all. In many artworks depicting St. Lucy, she is pictured holding a pair of her own eyes, sometimes on a platter, other times on stalks, like a strange flower. By now, you can probably guess what happened to her. After her eyes were removed, they miraculously grew back in the same place. It's no surprise then that St. Lucy is the patron saint of the blind. She is particularly popular in Sweden, where on the darkest night of the year, one young woman wears a crown of candles on her head, a symbol of bringing light back to the world. So far, we've seen a collection of Christian saints, and their rather gruesome backstories, from being flayed alive to inventive methods of execution. But why do these stories have to be so, well, horrific? Throughout Christian history, martyrdom was an unfortunate reality. This is true for Jesus' earliest followers, like St. Peter. According to one popular Christian legend, he was crucified upside down. These stories depicting heroic deeds flourished during the Middle Ages and were often recorded in saintly tales known as hagiographies. Collections like the Golden Legend became some of the most widely read pieces of medieval literature and inspired countless works of Christian art. While these stories are a little bleak, they were never meant to inspire fear. In fact, quite the opposite. The trials endured by saints were often seen as a source of hope and a reminder of the glory that awaits followers in heaven. Of course, others had to face trials of a more paranormal nature, as we shall see in our next saint. The Temptation of Saint Anthony. Not to be confused with St. Anthony of Padua, whose gruesome relic we explored in a previous video. St. Anthony the Great was a 4th century monk who decided to shun civilization in search of a contemplative life. During his desert wanderings, the saint was ambushed by a gang of demons. However, due to his holy power, he began to miraculously levitate into the air, taking the ferocious demons up with him. It's a scene so iconic and bizarre that even Michelangelo decided to reproduce it. Over time, artistic depictions of this demonic assault became increasingly surreal, like this nightmarish scene inspired by Hieronymus Bosch. In the center is a gigantic screaming head. Marching out of its mouth is an array of demons, including this cute duck couple holding hands. Meanwhile, Saint Anthony appears off to the right, trying to figure out just what on earth is going on. We've all heard the phrase, battling your demons, but these paintings take it to the next level. Judging by the artworks, it seems that wherever St. Anthony went, he just couldn't catch a break. The twice martyred saint. Among all the Christian saints, few have a story that go quite as hard as Saint Sebastian. Originally a soldier in the Roman army, Sebastian kept his Christian faith a secret. Eventually, however, his actions were discovered, and he was brought before the Emperor Diocletian, one of the most notorious persecutors of early Christians. Sebastian was condemned and was tied to a stake, while Roman archers unleashed a hail of arrows upon him, so many that he was pierced from head to toe. Despite his brutal execution, Sebastian was later found miraculously alive, and rather than flee with his life, he chose to march straight back to the emperor and confront him in person. Despite his bravery, the emperor ordered him to be beaten with clubs, and it seems that this time it did the trick. The double martyrdom of Saint Sebastian became one of the most iconic and enduring stories in Christian history. Over the centuries, countless artists have captured this dramatic scene. Due to his own miraculous recovery, Saint Sebastian became the patron saint of plagues. That's why you'll often find him in plague-themed artworks, directly appealing to God on behalf of the suffering masses down below. The Headless Bishop. We've seen saints who have met a gruesome fate, but one saint kept on going, introducing Saint Denis of Paris, who in the 3rd century was beheaded for practicing his faith. Now, for most people, losing your head would mark a rather conclusive end to a preaching career, but not for Saint Denis. According to a popular legend, he picked up his severed head and preached a sermon on the importance of forgiveness. After wandering through the streets of Paris, the reality of the situation seems to have caught up with him. Nowadays, Saint Denis is the patron saint of headaches, and can be found on the ornate facade of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. In fact, Christian art is surprisingly full of these beheaded saints, so much so that the church even has a name for them, cephalophores, literally head carriers. Over the course of this video, we've explored some of Christianity's most hardcore saints, holy figures who earned their reputations the hard way. What we have to remember them by are these marvellous artworks created in their honour. Viewed as a collection, it may certainly seem that they're rather macabre. It's clear that people in generations past lived far closer to death in their everyday lives, and the Christian art of that era reflects this reality. Despite their persecution, the saints held on to their faith, allowing for Christianity to not only survive, but thrive. If you're curious to see more, look no further than Hieronymus Bosch, a Dutch painter who captured some of the strangest scenes of art history, from terrifying hellscapes to the bizarre creatures that inhabit them. Watch here to find out more. Hey, thanks for watching. I had a great time making this, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you like this video and want to see more, why not subscribe? A like and a comment also go a really long way. Anyway, I look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.